So the phrase Vayashkem Avraham baboker, and Abraham arose early in the morning, appears 3 times in our parsha. The first time is after the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Says the verse, Abraham arose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked out over Sodom and Gomorrah and over all the land of the plain, and he saw the smoke of the earth, which rose like the smoke of a kiln. The second time is when Abraham is commanded to take his son and heir, Yitzchak, the second time is where at the insistence of Sarah, he banished Hagar and Ishmael from his home. Abraham arose early in the morning, there's the same phrase again, took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, placed it on her shoulder, gave her the child and sent her away. And the third and last time is when Abraham is commanded to take his son and heir Yitzchak to be offered up as a burnt offering. Abraham arose early in the morning, same phrase, and saddled his donkey, and he took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son. So the purpose of telling us that Abraham arose early in the morning is not just to tell us that Abraham was an early riser. I don't need to have a Torah to tell you that. The sages see in this phrase, and particularly in the last 2 instances, an indication of Abraham's relationship with God. His love and obedience were such that he acted with tremendous alacrity and unhesitatingly, even in the performance of divinely commanded deeds, even in those instances when he might have felt a natural resistance. So in regard to both sending away Hagar and Ishmael, and certainly in regard to the binding of Isaac, it would have been really perfectly understandable if he had delayed and dragged his feet for as long as possible, as most of us are likely to do when we have to face an unpalatable or an unpleasant task. But the sages then further go on to say that from one of these 3 instances of Abraham rising early in the morning, we learn that Abraham instituted the Shacharit prayer, the morning prayer. I mean, after all, why wake up early if not to daven, okay? But one would naturally presume that the 3rd instance of this phrase is the one from which we deduce this principle. I mean, wouldn't you be praying to God if, God forbid, the life of your child were in mortal danger? So that's the obvious candidate of the 3 phrases. But nevertheless, and to our surprise, the Talmud derives the suggestion that Abraham instituted the morning prayer from its first instance in the parsha, when he arose early and returned to the place where he had bargained with God the day before, and when he looked over towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And this raises an interesting question, an intriguing question for the commentaries. What was he praying for? So there are a number of views which are suggested by the commentaries. The 16th century Spanish commentator Vadia ben Yaakov Sforno says that the previous day, Abraham had stood in this very place using his logic to persuade God not to destroy the cities. And now on this occasion, he returns to the same place in order to beg for divine mercy. And the 19th century Polish commentator Rabbi Meir Leibish Visser, known as the Malbim, suggests that Abraham was in fact praying for the safety of his nephew Lot, who after all lived in Sodom, one of the cities. I'd like to suggest to you a reason why the sages felt that Abraham's prayer on that occasion became emblematic of prayer, of all prayer, rather than the day in which he took his son to be sacrificed. On that latter occasion, the Akedah, Abraham knew exactly what was in store. God had commanded him to sacrifice his son. He didn't, of course, know yet when or how, but he knew what he was about to do. But by contrast, on the morning after he pleaded with God and had bargained with him to save the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, on this next morning when he stood there again, he faced a whole host of uncertainties. Were the cities destroyed? Or were there at least 10 righteous people found within them, as agreed with God the day before? What had happened to Lot? If the cities had indeed been destroyed together with all of the inhabitants, what would have been the ramifications for him going forward? Abraham's prayer that morning was like someone in the waiting room of a hospital waiting for the doctor to come out and to give news. Or, if you want a better example, it's like millions of Americans, including the president and his contender, in an agonizing wait to find out the outcome of the United States election. The truth of the matter is, we all prefer a bit of certainty in our lives. We don't do very well with uncertainty, as evidenced, of course, by the effect of this seemingly unending pandemic on the mental health of the nation, and particularly young people, and as we enter into yet another lockdown. So with profound insight, the sages of the Talmud understood that the time we most need to turn to prayer are the times of uncertainty in our lives, when we simply can't see a clear future, and when we have the feeling that we've just lost control over our destiny. Because tefillah is a deeply stabilizing activity, reaffirming our consciousness that there is a master of the universe who cares about his creatures and who conducts the affairs of the world with compassion. Prayer helps to instill in us the conviction that whatever the outcome of this moment of uncertainty, it will be for the good. That is why the moment of Abraham's greatest uncertainty, I suggest, became the paradigm for the Shachrit prayer that we engage in each morning as we rise to greet and to engage with yet another day. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom.